Chapter 61 Tricking Lang Mei, 2, You are listening at novelfull.audio. What did you say again? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Zhang Wei's grin widened as he spoke, his eyes gleaming with amusement. I said, your daughter was never under my control. How can I free her? Lang Mei felt a chill run down her spine as she fell silent, unable to comprehend the situation. Her lips parted as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Boo. But what? If you want to know about the previous incident, look over there. Zhang Wei pointed towards the stairs, where Lang Yan was standing. She looked conscious, but her eyes were filled with a bitter smile. Lang Yan definitely knew how to act, having worked in law enforcement for so long had helped her in that regard. What is happening? Lang Mei whispered, her voice trembling. Zhang Wei chuckled, his amusement evident in his tone. It's quite simple. Your daughter planned all of this as an act to force you into becoming my slave. The purpose was simple. She knew if I approached you directly, you would resist or possibly run away. Now with you as your slave, you can't run even if you want to. As for Lang Yan, she was never under my control. Of course, although your daughter came up with the plan, and I was against it. Is something I would like to say, but... Zhang Wei paused, his eyes flickering towards Lang Mei. Who would be against the idea of having a beautiful woman like you, he said with a smirk. Lang Mei felt her brain short-circuit, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. It was an act. She couldn't help but ask, her voice filled with disbelief and confusion. Why? Her words were directed towards Lang Yan, who looked down at the ground, unable to meet her mother's eyes. Lang Yan strode down the hallway with a bitter smile etched on her face. She arrived in front of her mother, and for a moment, her usually composed facade crumbled, revealing an expression of sadness and frustration. However, with a single glare from Zhang Wei, she quickly regained her composure. It was, of course, for you Mei, Lang Yan said, her voice tinged with bitterness. I think it's time you move on. You are not a normal person and still have a long life ahead. Forget about the past already. And if you can't, I would forcefully make Zhang Wei take you. Lang Mei's eyes shook heavily as she tried to process her daughter's words. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You thought like this, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Her expression was bitter, as if she had been struck by a sudden realization. Her eyes unconsciously darted at Zhang Wei, who stood there, looking at the scene with a gentle smile. He seemed unfazed by the tension in the room, as if he knew that this conversation was long overdue. But he and you? Lang Mei stammered, her mind racing with questions. She couldn't believe that her daughter was suggesting such a thing. Zhang Wei let out a wry smile, pretending he was innocent in this one. Lang Yan, however, spoke actively, her voice firm and resolute. I don't care about it, she said, her eyes blazing with determination. But I do. Lang Mei retorted, her eyes fixated on Lang Yan. She was stunned by her daughter's boldness and couldn't believe that she was suggesting such a thing. Lang Yan had said this before, but Lang Mei always took it as a playful remark. Whenever Lang Mei tried to set her up with a random guy, Lang Yan would fire back that Lang Mei should find a man for herself too. However, this time, Lang Yan's words held a weight that Lang Mei had never noticed before. As Lang Mei looked into her Lang Yan's eyes, she saw a determination that she had never seen before. The seriousness in Lang Yan's gaze left Lang Mei speechless. Was she really pushing her daughter into doing this? Lang Mei couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Her guilt only increased when she saw Zhang Wei again. She couldn't help but wonder if Lang Yan had dragged him into this too. Lang Mei's heart sank at the thought of it. However, Zhang Wei's shrug and response caught Lang Mei off guard. Don't look at me like that. She might have suggested it, but I was in favor of her idea as well. How can I deny the idea of a mother-daughter pair? Why, you perverted man? Lang Mei's face flushed red, and she couldn't believe his words. How could he be so shameless as to declare it so boldly? Lang Mei couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions as she processed everything that had just happened. Lang Yan's heart was heavy as she watched the scene unfold before her. Mixed emotions swirled inside her, like a storm brewing in her chest. On one hand, she despised the idea of manipulating her own mother, but on the other hand, she couldn't bear the thought of losing Lang Mei. Lang Yan knew that if she didn't do as Zhang Wei said, he would stop at nothing to kill Lang Mei. Memories of Zhang Wei's past atrocities flooded her mind, causing bile to rise up in her throat. As he had seen him take the life of an innocent child before, and she knew without a doubt that he was capable of doing the same to Lang Mei. But the thing was, would Zhang Wei really would have killed Lang Mei if Lang Yan revolted? The answer was definitely no, but it wasn't something Lang Yan needed to be privy of. Once again, Zhang Wei lied through his teeth, without even a shred of shame. One couldn't help but marvel at his ability to deceive others so effortlessly. Such skill was a hallmark of a true villain. Someone who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. In contrast, those with good intentions found it nearly impossible to lie smoothly or even contemplate such heinous acts. As Lang Yan struggled with her conscience, her mother remained oblivious to the danger that lurked beneath the surface. Lang Mei couldn't quite put her finger on what was bothering her, but she knew deep down that something wasn't right. She tried to piece together the events of the past few days, from Zhang Wei's late-night visits to the events of today. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, like a jigsaw puzzle falling into perfect alignment. Lang Mei realized that it was time to stop pestering her daughter and start paying attention to her own feelings. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt towards Zhang Wei, but she also knew that it wouldn't be fair to her daughter to pursue a relationship with him. Why share a man with her own flesh and blood? Lang Mei vowed to explore other options, even as she struggled to ignore the pull she felt charismatic Zhang Wei. Lang Mei pleaded with Zhang Wei to remove the seal, but he simply shook his head and refused. She could see the wicked smile on his face and knew that he had ulterior motives. It was clear to her that the man was greedy and wanted both her and her daughter. Despite this, Lang Mei didn't feel like debating the issue any further. She had a sinking feeling in her gut that told her it was pointless to argue. As she looked into Zhang Wei's eyes, she saw the desire burning within them, and she knew that he was not a saintly man. But why did Zhang Wei expose his intentions so blatantly? Because he wanted to appear like a normal man, interested in beauty, rather than a saintly figure. If he had simply said that the seal could not be removed, she would have become suspicious. So, it was better for him to play this game of manipulation. In the end, Zhang Wei had successfully manipulated both mother and daughter into becoming his slaves. Villain points plus 50. Slaves. 1. Lang Yan. Age. 23. Female. Initial stage of core formation realm 2. Long Yufei, Rose. Age. 24. Female 3. Lang Mei. Age. 43. Female. Intermediate stage of spirit tempering realm. Chapter 62 Suicide. Zhang Wei learned a lesson. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Master, why the hell are you writing this gibberish? A small disciple sat near a narcissistic man, asking with an exasperated tone. The narcissist paused his pen and replied, I am getting old, and it's time to transfer some of my twisted wisdom to my fellow Taoists, so they don't get misled by the damn believers of light. The narcissist let out an evil chuckle. He wasn't going to die without sharing his forbidden secrets with the world, even if it meant the world going to hell. He also had a hidden motive behind his writing, to corrupt innocent readers and add to his army of evil Taoists. But who cares, right? He put down his pen, finally finishing his new evil script. Master, is it done? Asked the disciple. The narcissist nodded and said, yes, take a look. The child leaned over to peek at the text, but before he could, a hand clamped onto the back of his neck, and just like that, a new disciple died due to lack of breath. Sigh, now I have to find a new assistant, the narcissist muttered with amusement, one who asks fewer stupid questions. A/N. This chapter have some extra explanations. Lang Mei was beyond frustrated. Her foot pressed down heavily on the accelerator as she muttered to herself in agitation, "Ugh. Why am I doing this?" Beside her sat a man, reclining in his seat as if he hadn't been affected by the sudden acceleration. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of irritation at the small smirk on his face. "Why indeed," he replied, his voice dripping with amusement. "Perhaps because your daughter was exhausted after being bounced around all night. And as a responsible mother, it's your job to take care of her and, of course, drop me back home." Lang Mei's eyebrows furrowed at his words, but she had to admit he had a point. "Don't talk about Yen like that," she huffed, aware that the man was testing her patience. Zhang Wei, the man beside her, nodded with a small chuckle and said, "Of course. My apologies. So, may I assume that I can speak explicitly about you instead?" "What, when do I say that?" Lang Mei's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at Zhang Wei, not knowing whether to laugh or cry at his strange comment. The rest of the journey was meant to be peaceful, or at least that's what Lang Mei had hoped for. However, Zhang Wei's hands had other plans. They started to wander up her thighs, despite her efforts to push them away. She was wearing a green knee-length mini-skirt, and Zhang Wei's hands easily slipped beneath the cloth, causing Lang Mei to gasp in shock. "You." Her voice was laced with disbelief as she turned to face him. Zhang Wei simply leaned back in the seat, pretending to be stoic with his eyes closed, while his hands continued to misbehave. Lang Mei felt frustration and even a hint of fear creep in, unsure of what to do next. "Better focus on the road, if you don't want both of us to die," Zhang Wei added, slightly opening his eyes. Suddenly, the car tires screeched, and Lang Mei quickly veered the steering wheel to the right just in time to avoid a collision. Her heart was pounding, and she felt beads of sweat form on her brow. Despite her shock and the creeping hand down her legs, Lang Mei tried to keep a straight face and focus on driving, determined to reach their destination safely. Zhang Wei's actions held an undeniable purpose, driving him towards an end goal with unflinching determination. The reason why most men fail to progress past acquaintance status with women is due to their ability to respect their privacy. It's like trying to grasp a bar of soap. The tighter you grasp, the more it slips away. Yes, that right folks, if you respect a woman's personal space like a gentleman, then you would be forever stuck into her list of men that she likes but don't want to date or progress with. If you truly want to progress with a woman, you must tread lightly and occasionally invade her personal space, but always be ready to pull back at the right time. It's a delicate dance, one wrong move and the music stops. Subtly brushing your hands against her breasts or back, holds the key to deciphering her desires and intents. The reaction she gives is the signal that guides you through the labyrinthine maze of attraction. Evading their space is important, but knowing when to pull back is crucial. Otherwise, the consequences will leave you red-faced and embarrassed. Or worse, behind bars in a jail cell. This is a game of risk and the rewards are high. But so are the stakes. It's like playing with fire, the heat can warm you or burn you. You may consult the same with a woman, but her advice will be sugar-coated with platitudes such as, you must respect a woman's privacy and space if you want her heart. It's all smoke and mirrors, a magician's trick. Ask the fisherman, not the fish. Only a fisherman knows the intricate secrets of the bait, the lure, and the catch. Anyone may drop the line, but only a skilled fisherman can reel in the prize. Women always struggle with being honest and speaking straightforwardly. They can never bring themselves to say sentences like, "Oh, I don't like him because he is poor." Instead, they would rather say something like, "As a woman, would prefer a partner who is capable, takes care of himself, etc." It's as if they are afraid to say what they truly mean. Never trust a woman's words on getting women. Quotes a narcissistic author. It's a bleak outlook on women and their intentions, but is there any truth to it? Zhang Wei, the fisherman, was a true master of his craft. He knew all the tricks and had a deft touch. Being one of the finest artists, his hands easily climbed up Lang Mei's thighs, ignoring all obstacles as if they weren't even there. Lang Mei's eyes flickered as her face turned a deep shade of crimson. She could feel the warmth spreading throughout her body as Zhang Wei's fingers brushed against her underwear. A tingling sensation enveloped her, making her shiver involuntarily. "Okay, that's enough," Lang Mei finally spoke up, removing one hand from the steering wheel to stop Zhang Wei's exploring hand. She placed her own hand on top of his, hoping to convey that she meant what she said. Zhang Wei smirked, moving his finger to tease her once again. His eyes danced with a mischievous glint. Lang Mei couldn't help but shudder under his touch. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before. She pressed her lips tightly together, unable to find the right words to refute him. In the end, she settled for a diplomatic answer. "Just stop it already, or I can't drive." It was a close call, but Lang Mei knew that she had to stay focused. She couldn't let Zhang Wei's charms distract her anymore. This woman had completely forgotten that she was considering exploring other options besides Zhang Wei. But it wasn't entirely her fault, as Zhang Wei knew exactly when to strike. The first mover advantage always worked in his favor. If he had done nothing and left her house after their previous conversation, perhaps Lang Mei would have stuck to her original thoughts. But he had completely altered her mind and thoughts with his actions. There was always one crucial moment where a woman might have second thoughts, and that's when a man must strike. It's essential to confirm one's reservation during that critical moment. However, new Taoists often have difficulty recognizing such moments and end up wondering why their date never calls them back, even though everything seemed to be going perfectly. Zhang Wei chose to play Lang Mei's game on his terms, a smirk hanging on his face as he subtly hinted, "You do know you're my slave now, right? So logically, you can't resist, even if you want to." He spoke with a serious tone. Lang Mei's face turned expressionless before she gave him a provocative smile and said, "What? Gonna use force to control this old lady now?" She pouted and acted like a kid saying this, but it was merely a test. If Zhang Wei didn't refute her, it would degrade his opinion in her mind. However, there was also a hidden side to Lang Mei's question that she wasn't aware of due to her instincts as a woman. This question was aimed at changing the power dynamics of their relationship. Here, any other person would try to explain that slave seals are not meant for that purpose, and he wouldn't misuse it and blah blah. Nothing was wrong with that. But the power would shift to Lang Mei the moment Zhang Wei started to justify himself. One should always look out for questions aimed at changing the power dynamics of a relationship. Women often use them due to their manipulative instinct, and they may do so while acting cute and innocent, specifically to take advantage of regression to make you submit. Their conscious mind may not be aware, but their unconscious is. There are also many women who knowingly use this tactic to their advantage. However, Zhang Wei remained stoic, his eyes fixed ahead and his face impassive as he refused to choose either of the routes presented to him. Lang Mei saw his silence and felt her annoyance bubbling up inside of her, her fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. "Ignoring me, huh?" she muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she searched for a sign of weakness in his stoic facade. Zhang Wei remained unmoved, until suddenly his lips parted and he ordered, "Turn right." Lang Mei turned to look at him, her confusion replaced by shock as her hands seemed to move of their own accord, the car turning sharply to the right. She felt like she was losing control of her own body, a wave of panic rising up within her as she tried to understand what was happening. "What?" she cried out, her voice laced with fear and disbelief. Zhang Wei simply laughed softly, the sound like a cold wind in the confined space of the car. "This is what is meant by forcing. Old lady, he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. Lang Mei felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment at the old lady jibe. I am not old, she protested, her foot pressing harder on the accelerator as if to show him she still had control. Zhang Wei merely smiled, but his silence added to her embarrassment. He was once again very clever, he did not directly say that he was going to control or force her. He only hinted that he had the ability to do so, but despite that, he wasn't doing it. Lang Mei had unwittingly absorbed a small piece of information that would remain buried deep in her unconscious mind until the crucial moment. Even if Zhang Wei were to ask her to do something outrageous at that moment, she might resist initially, but her unconscious mind would stir, questioning the utility of resistance. It might whisper, "What's the use of resistance? You're already helpless against him, so why not just comply with his demands?" And so, Zhang Wei continued to maintain his gentlemanly appearance, despite the fact that he was, in fact, forcing her mind to submit to him. There was an insidious simplicity to his technique, akin to a father threatening his child, "If you don't do as I say, I'll throw you out of the house." Even as a child, you might know that your father isn't speaking seriously, but the fear of the consequences alone would often be enough to convince you to change your mind and do the task that you had previously refused. Your unconscious mind becomes aware that your father holds power over you, regardless of whether or not he exercises it. And so, even if you're not consciously aware of it, you might feel that twinge of fear in the form of anger when he says those words. The car soon arrived near Zhang Wei's residence. However, right in front of the building, a huge crowd had gathered along with many media personnel and vans. What is happening here? Lang Mei knitted her brows, parked the car nearby, and stepped out. Since the way was blocked, they couldn't move further. Zhang Wei also stepped out of the car, an ominous premonition hitting him. Chapter 63 Suicide. Zhang Wei learned a lesson. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lang Mei's brows furrowed, and her eyes darted around the commotion. She parked the car at a nearby spot, getting out of it and bursting with curiosity. Alas, they found their path blocked. Her companion, Zhang Wei, also stepped out of the vehicle and looked spooked. Why are there so many cameras? Lang Mei craned her neck to try and see what was happening. Don't tell me a celebrity is here. Zhang Wei's mind exploded at the word celebrity. He grabbed Lang Mei's hand, impulsive and driven by curiosity, and pulled her towards the epicenter of chaos. She was taken aback by his boldness and couldn't help feeling awkward as he pulled her along. Are you not afraid your wife will be jealous? Lang Mei tried to make small talk, but it came out more like a question. Zhang Wei stopped abruptly, and she almost bumped into him. He stared at their hands for a brief moment before his gaze darted to the 7th floor of the building. It seemed like he was contemplating something. Briefly, Lang Mei thought that he would let go of her hand, but instead, he slapped her butt and said, "Don't say nonsense and walk." His words were firm, and she sensed that he would not take no for an answer. Zhang Wei had no desire to watch the dramatic events unfolding in front of his residence, but he had already stepped on the pedal, so he couldn't back off now. His heart raced with curiosity about what was happening in front of him, and he pushed forward, heedless of anything else. As they approached the throngs of people, whispered rumors reached their ears. "What's going on here?" asked one resident, oblivious to the situation. The media guy finished taking pictures and laughed, the same old story. A small time actor jumped from the balcony and died. Police say she was drunk, but it's always the same. Depression, over-drinking, and in the end, suicide. He muttered about how people came to the big city and were ultimately crushed by its pressures. Zhang Wei furrowed his brows, wondering, an actor? Is it? In that moment, he quickened his pace and pushed through the crowd with brute strength. One person grumbled in frustration, "Hey, watch it, man," but Zhang Wei didn't care. His heart pounded as he finally caught a glimpse of the dead body, lying on the hard concrete floor cordoned off by police personnel. But nothing mattered until he saw the woman's face, illuminated by the flashing police lights. Damn it, He cursed under his breath and withdrew from the scene while pulling Lang Mei along with him. "What are you doing? Don't tell me you know her." Lang Mei exclaimed with suspicion, standing beside Zhang Wei as he finally stopped at a safe distance from the bloody scene. The image was burned into his mind. The broken head of the red-haired Rome Meili, with blood splattered all over the place. It was a gruesome sight, and yet he could still recognize her. This realization made him break into an instant sweat, as he tried to think of how to get out of the situation. Frantically, he pulled out his phone and trying to call Yulei, hastily planning his temporary hiding place. Lang Mei couldn't help but feel puzzled by Zhang Wei's erratic behavior. "Host, stop," the system's voice boomed in Zhang Wei's mind, snapping him out of his thoughts. "She didn't leave any notes behind, so you don't need to worry about getting exposed," the system reminded him, as Zhang Wei tried to calm himself down. "But the camera recordings may still make you a suspect," the system added, "although that can be taken care of quickly with Lang Yan's help." Zhang Wei asked, with a brief pause in his voice, "There is no note?" "No, host. There is none," the system confirmed, finally putting Zhang Wei's mind at ease. The cameras weren't a major concern for him, as he knew that his connections could help him escape suspicion. But had there been a suicide note that already gone public, then he would have been forced to withdraw from the scene. It was a narrow escape indeed. "Is everything okay?" Lang Mei asked, her expression filled with genuine concern. Zhang Wei shot her a quick glance before nodding with a hint of bitterness in his eyes. This was a turn he hadn't expected, one that had caught him off guard completely. He had considered all possible outcomes, but never did he imagine that someone would take their own life. A chill ran down his spine as he pondered the risk involved in blackmailing Lang Yan. If there were no safety precautions, the end could have been the same. Sure, given Lang Yan's temperament, it was unlikely to happen, but who knew what kind of game she played? Sweat beads accumulated on his forehead, and he swiped them away, feeling his nerves get the better of him. He realized only then why Rome Meili had given him so many extra villain points. "Host, you should take this as an opportunity to learn, instead of falling apart over it," the system suggested, bringing him to his senses. He had thought that blackmailing was just about threatening someone to do what you want, but it was far from that. He had attempted extreme methods without considering the possible repercussions. The worst part of blackmailing was the uncertainty, not knowing when the victim would hit their breaking point and take matters into their own hands. The thought of the victim taking their own life hit him hard. He knew what kind of trouble he would be in case the media got involved. Zhang Wei had learned his lesson the hard way. So did the poor author. Zhang Wei forced a brittle smile as he was ready to move into his apartment, but suddenly felt a tap on his back, causing his muscles to tense up. As if the universe was conspiring against him, it was Yulei, her curious gaze focused on the pair of them. "You two are quite close," she commented, her voice carrying a hint of amusement as Zhang Wei turned around. Lang Mei, who was caught off guard by the sudden interruption, raised her sharp brows, making her forehead furrow and her face turning slightly awkward. However, she composed herself quickly, regained her composure, and then spoke up, "Yeah. He even dragged me to meet you," she added with a hint of sarcasm, casting a sidelong glance at Zhang Wei. Zhang Wei's eyes finally landed on Yulei's form, and he could tell from her bitter expression that she was displeased by his absence the previous night. Trying to mask her gloom, she greeted him half-heartedly, "Hi." Zhang Wei scrutinized her from top to bottom before uttering, "You haven't left for work today. Why am I disturbing you guys?" Yulei spoke jokingly before turning to the car. "Just leaving already. There was a huge mess here this morning, I got late," she complained, her lips forming a pout. The mess was undoubtedly created by the crowd that had gathered due to Rome Meili's death. "I didn't even know she was our neighbor until today," Yulei spoke with a dry laugh as she realized her last words were quite rude, subconsciously sensing the tension in the air. Zhang Wei only cast a fleeting glance at the crowd before shifting his gaze to the Bentley parked nearby. Despite the windows being rolled up, he could sense the presence of two people inside. Suddenly, Yulei moved closer and planted a kiss on Zhang Wei's lips, whispering, "The boss is in the car, can't delay, the key is beneath the vase, CYA." Lang Mei, who had been watching the two interact, stood there, feeling slightly uncomfortable and out of place until Yulei turned to her and muttered an apology before heading to her car. As she watched Yulei drive away, Lang Mei let out a sigh of relief, glad to be rid of the awkwardness. As the car door finally opened, Lang Mei's eyes squinted in suspicion as she asked, "Lin Ruoshi? Lin Group? Does your wife work for them?" She gazed at Zhang Wei with a curious expression, but not one of genuine interest. Zhang Wei merely nodded his head, barely registering her words as his attention was drawn to the woman in question. Even though she was wearing sunglasses, he couldn't help but grin at the sight of her face. And, to his satisfaction, he quickly realized that Lin Ruoshi didn't have any cultivation whatsoever. However, Yi Feng's presence in the car made him frown deeply. "Why is he always in my way?" he thought with a scowl on his face. Zhang Wei didn't want to risk revealing his existence to Celestials by directly confronting any guardians or dealing with any more bullshit than he had to. The system had given assurances, but he knew better than to blindly trust technology or the powers that be. But, he knew he couldn't delay things any longer. Now was the time to deal with Yi Feng, along with the Song family if needed. "Do you have more influence than the Lin Group?" Zhang Wei asked Lang Mei, hoping to get some information from her. Lang Mei raised her eyebrows in surprise at his sudden question, but quickly put on a pouty face and replied, "Why? Do you want to use me and my resources to bully people? Let me tell you, I won't help you." And with that, she stuck her tongue out playfully at him, teasing him. Zhang Wei's lips twitched in annoyance at her behavior. He couldn't help but smack her lightly on the head, hoping to get a serious response out of her. "Just answer the question," he said in a no-nonsense tone. "Ouch!" Lang Mei gave him a grudgeful look and kicked his foot, but quickly realized her own mistake when her back received the full brunt of the kick. Zhang Wei's body was as hard as steel, and she was in no position to challenge him at the moment, at least not until she uses her powers. Regret washing over her, Lang Mei spoke with a mixture of astonishment and bitterness. "Your wife is surprisingly calm," she said, her words acidic as she anticipated a tongue-lashing from Yulei. Throughout their conversation, Lang Mei continued to hold on to Zhang Wei's hand, tightly. Zhang Wei couldn't help a wry smile as he replied. "She's not calm, just knows when to ask the right questions." "Sigh, let's go," he said, pulling Lang Mei towards the apartment. As she followed him, Lang Mei momentarily forgot that she was only here to drop off Zhang Wei, and not to go inside his apartment. Two metaphorical bombs had dropped on Zhang Wei, leaving him with two things to explain to Yulei. With a shrug, Zhang Wei whispered resignedly. "Let the bomb explode if it must. If worst comes to worst, I'll just have to tie her up and lock her in, if she rebels too much." Yulei's obsession and dependence on him left Zhang Wei unsure as to how she would react. Would she go all out and explode, trying to keep him to herself, or would she settle for less because losing him was not an option? Zhang Wei started to weigh his options carefully, his mind working overtime as he tried to find a way to redirect his wife's attention, before something terrible happened. Disclaimer. Yi Feng is my own original character, so don't assume its backstory would be same as some other novel, it's mix of many elements. Chapter 64 The Unfortunate Fate of Feng Xinyue by Zhang Wei, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lang Mei remained surprisingly calm throughout the ride, almost akin to a devoted lover following Zhang Wei's every lead. Zhang Wei began to wonder, has she come to terms with her fate, or is she simply in the dark? He couldn't understand why she had agreed to venture into his apartment, but he knew he couldn't let her leave empty-handed. The mere thought of exploiting her ignorance brought a grin to Zhang Wei's lips. He leaned down and lifted the vase, unveiling the key hidden beneath it, but his thoughts soon wandered to Yulei's motivations for trapping Feng Xinyue. It wasn't until the door finally creaked open that Zhang Wei realized why that little Nizi was locked inside. As Lang Mei stepped inside, she couldn't help but think, did she created this mess? The TV set in front of her was shockingly destroyed, with a gaping hole in the middle. Feng Xinyue sat sulking on the sofa, her hands clasped together and cheeks puffed out in displeasure. Zhang Wei quickly put the pieces together, realizing that the little Nizi must have thrown a tantrum while he was out and hurled the remote control towards the TV, shattering the screen. The extent of her damage was hardly surprising, considering her immense physical strength, but now she was livid because of lack of entertainment. After all, she had already destroyed the only form of amusement in the room. Suddenly, Nizi's sharp ears perked up, picking up the sound of footsteps approaching her. She turned her head towards the door and gasped in delight as she saw both Lang Mei and Zhang Wei standing side by side. A look of pure ecstasy washed over her face as she ran towards Zhang Wei, her tiny lungs inhaling sharply before she embraced him tightly, almost knocking him off his feet. Caught off guard, Lang Mei stood back, awkwardly watching as Nizi's single-minded focus zeroed in on Xia Tian. "Oh, hi you," she tried to say, her voice trailing off as she saw that Nizi had completely forgotten her and was now contentedly rubbing her cheeks against Xia Tian's clothes. Zhang Wei remained indifferent to Feng Xinyue, who was rubbing her head near his chest. Instead, he focused his attention on his living room. "Did you do this?" he asked, pointing at the gaping hole in his beloved TV. Feng Xinyue furrowed her brow, interrupted her rhythmic head rubbing, and glanced at the TV for a fleeting moment before resuming her original activity with renewed vigor. Zhang Wei's face contorted in annoyance, and he spoke, his tone harsh and menacing. "Little girl, you have 1 second to answer me, or I'll toss you out," he threatened, making Feng Xinyue stop her head rubbing and look at the damage she had wrought. Feng Xinyue was forced to justify herself. "It broke. It was too weak," she muttered, grumbling before persisting with her actions. Lang Mei, on the other hand, struggled to suppress her laughter, observing their friendly exchange. "You two have gotten quite close in a very short time," she remarked. A flicker of amazement and confusion passed through her eyes as she examined the girl with exquisite white hair who was clinging to Zhang Wei. Although Lang Mei knew for certain that it was the same girl he had adopted, she looked different now, unrecognizable even. For a brief moment, Lang Mei was tempted to steal the girl away from Zhang Wei, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Since Lang Mei was now slave of Zhang Wei, the effects of Feng Xinyue's spell didn't seem to work on her. Lang Mei was captivated by Feng Xinyue's beauty for a moment before snapping out of it. Zhang Wei, what am I doing here?" she asked, looking around the room with uncertainty. Zhang Wei stopped playing with his human-shaped pet and glanced at her. "What do you mean? Weren't you just too excited to share the bed, so you followed me here?" he said seriously, his gaze intent on her. As the realization began to dawn on her, the air seemed to freeze, and Lang Mei confirmed that she had been oblivious, innocently following Zhang Wei without a clue of his intentions. Zhang Wei's smile widened as he watched panic spread over Lang Mei's face. "Don't even think about escaping," he warned, but Lang Mei seemed to ignore his words as she awkwardly waved goodbye to him. Bye. She appeared to be walking backwards while still staring at him. Zhang Wei shook his head, about to command her to come back to him when he suddenly noticed something odd and glanced down in surprise. "Why you?" Zhang Wei spoke in disbelief. Lang Mei heard his confused voice and stopped, looking at him curiously as his pants seemed to suddenly fall off by themselves. "Oh," groaned Zhang Wei, feeling a hot tongue brushing against his manhood. It was as if the next moment, heaven itself had enveloped his manhood, and it started to sink into a warm and soft place. "Ha!" Lang Mei's eyes widened in shock as she witnessed the unbelievable scene in front of her. Don't tell me," she whispered in disbelief, moving sideways for a better angle. Her face immediately stiffened as she noticed Feng Xinyue eagerly holding out his penis, licking it, and occasionally taking it into her mouth. The girl was holding out Zhang Wei's manhood with agility and precision, her movements deft and practiced. Her hot tongue danced skillfully along the length of his shaft, eliciting moans of pleasure from Zhang Wei as she worked her way up and down. The sight of an innocent-looking girl performing such intimate acts on a grown man was almost too horrifying to bear, but Lang Mei couldn't seem to look away. She felt a strange mix of revulsion and fascination as she watched, the heat creeping up her neck despite the cool air of the hallway. To be honest, Lang Mei was quite impressed by her skills until she remembered Feng Xinyue's age. Her whole face heated up at this point, but she didn't care as the morality finally said it. "I thought I would leave you two alone. CYA, she blurted out, immediately running away like a scared rabbit. Her heart pounded faster than ever as she thought of the ridiculous situation inside. After walking a safe distance away from his door, she gritted her teeth in frustration. Beast. Pedo. What the hell has he taught her in just one day? She is already corrupted. Chapter 65 The Unfortunate Fate of Feng Xinyue by Zhang Wei. 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei's frustration mounted as Lang Mei vanished into the distance. He trained his eyes on Feng Xinyue, his narrowed gaze stern as he warned her, "You better be good at this, or else you're going to regret it." The little Nizi seized the message, giving him a thumbs up in response. With a sigh, Zhang Wei conjured up his telekinetic powers to shut the door behind them. Meanwhile, Feng Xinyue's tongue slithered around his shaft as she expertly navigated her way through the depths of his manhood. Her hands skillfully caressed and massaged his testicles, eliciting deep and throaty groans from Zhang Wei. Overwhelmed by the intoxicating sensations coursing through his body, Zhang Wei marveled at Feng Xinyue's prowess. How on earth did she learn to do that, he gasped, hardly believing what was happening. As soon as his length touched her lips, and she gently kissed his tip of manhood, Zhang Wei's senses came alive. Feng Xinyue relished the taste and texture of him on her tongue, taking controlled pulls and releasing his length with a seductive pop. Her hands were not idle either. She ran feather touches on the sensitive parts of his shaft that almost made him jump. The combined sensations of the hot and softness of her mouth, the tickling, grazing motion of her tongue, and the gentle but firm motion of her hands drove him crazy. Her head tilted, and she leaned in closer, driving his manhood deeper into the back of her mouth. With the tip of her tongue, she traced the ridge of his crown, exploring every crevice and hollow before taking him deep once again. Zhang Wei's eyes flicked up toward him, gauging his reaction as she continued her sensual ministrations. The pleasure she created was evident in his shudders and gasps for breath. The mixture of heat, and the gentle manipulation of her mouth and hands made him sigh in pleasure. Feng Xinyue could feel his length growing even harder in her mouth, and she smiled, knowing that she was giving him an unforgettable experience. Her hands and mouth moved in tandem, bringing him closer and closer to the edge until finally, she knew he was about to erupt. Zhang Wei pulled back slightly, her eyes fixed intently on his face. Her cute little tongue darted out, teasing the head of his cock, licking slowly and deliberately from base to tip. She wanted to draw out the pleasure, to make it last for as long as possible, it was like a game for her. But she couldn't bring him to the edge and stop, so she closed her eyes and slurped louder, going faster and harder than ever before. Slurp. Slurp, her suction increased, and the moistness of her mouth coating him was causing a shiver to run up his spine. She went down on him, pressing hard and swallowing his length until it was buried deep within her. At this moment, there was no place he'd rather be. Just as he felt the build-up of an intense orgasm rising within him, Zhang Wei pulled away completely, until his cum suddenly sprayed across her face in an explosion of pure pleasure. Feng Xinyue shut her eyes tightly, bracing herself for the impending impact. As the hot streams of cum rained down onto her face, it splattered onto her delicate features and dripped down onto her chin and neck. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinking the thick liquid out of her lashes before gazing up at Zhang Wei, her face now coated with his essence. A small, mischievous smile played on her lips as she reached up to gently wipe the sticky strands away from her eyes. With her hands now slick with his hot seed, she lifted her fingers to her lips and licked the sweet taste from her fingertips. Meanwhile, Zhang Wei's lips twisted into a wicked grin as he watched her sensuous display. Caressing her silver hair and letting out a deep sigh, he whispered to her, "You belong to me now, little fairy. Just wait until I find a way to strip you naked." The thought of exploring every inch of her flawless body made him practically get hard again. As his arousal grew, he couldn't resist the urge to devour her then and there. He wanted nothing more than to teach her a lesson she'd never forget, making her scream his name in bed and beg for mercy. In response to his words, Feng Xinyue simply nodded, her eyes smoldering with a fire of their own, and with a sly grin, she continued to clean her fingers. Both Zhang Wei and Feng Xinyue were enjoying themselves when the sudden sound of someone entering the room without knocking jolted them. Who is it now? Thought Zhang Wei, his gaze fixed on the door. Feng Xinyue's curious eyes also darted towards the intruder, hoping to find some clue by mere observation. At first, she thought it might be Yulei, but to her surprise, it was the foreign woman she had ignored earlier, Lang Mei. As Lang Mei's flushed face met their intense stares, all three of them were rooted to their spots, unsure of what to say or do. Zhang Wei seemed to be the most affected of all, followed closely by Feng Xinyue, who was visibly puzzled. But who was the third, you might ask? It was Zhang Wei's little brother. Sorry to disturb you too, I just forgot to give you this, Lang Mei stuttered, holding out a 5-colored feather. Zhang Wei was utterly perplexed as to why Lang Mei had traveled all the way down just to give them a feather, and that too without any prior notification. What made it even more bizarre was her sudden retreat without any explanation. The petal was too much for Lang Mei to adjust, and it left her bewildered and anxious. Strangely, however, she felt no disgust after seeing Feng Xinyue, knowing that it wasn't Zhang Wei's fault, the little Nizi was bit too charming to resist. Zhang Wei handed over the feather to Feng Xinyue to play with as he continued to ponder over Lang Mei's bizarre behavior. What is wrong with that woman's mind? He muttered, still incapable of wrapping his head around this strange turn of events. Host, this feather is no ordinary feather. It belongs to a powerful and ancient beast. The qi in this world is so thin that breaking through to the level of spirit tempering realm is nearly impossible. Lang Mei had to have used the qi from this feather to advance her cultivation level over the years. And even now, it contains enough qi to help you break through the stagnation of qi gathering realm and reach foundation establishment realm, explained the system, its voice ringing clear in Zhang Wei's mind. Zhang Wei's face lit up with a broad grin, a mixture of excitement and gratitude filling him. He could now break through naturally, and it was all thanks to Lang Mei, no matter her reasons for giving him the feather. Tisk, Tsundra, muttered Zhang Wei to himself, a hint of amusement in his voice. Zhang Wei believed in a simple ideology. Never trust a woman's words, just observe their actions. Women can lie to your face, even if they like you, and still use you like their tool. So, always focus on their actions and not what they say. They are all liars. Lang Mei's current actions proved that he could push her to the edge whenever he wanted, and yet she would still cooperate. Her protests would be nothing but a farce. Host. What? Zhang Wei's brows furrowed as he asked back. She is eating it, the system voice replied, and Zhang Wei's eyes widened in horror as he realized what had happened. Who is eating what? He demanded, looking around frantically. His gaze finally landed on Feng Xinyue, who was staring at him with her large doe-like eyes. Her gaze was unrepentant, as if daring him to challenge her. Realization suddenly dawned on Zhang Wei, and his face turned an ugly shade of red. Where is the feather? He asked, his voice barely containing his rage. Feng Xinyue blinked innocently, before admitting, I ate it, as she pointed to her stomach. You did what? Zhang Wei's frustration was almost tangible. He sighed deeply, his shadow cast over Feng Xingyue. She didn't seem to notice until she was suspended perilously over the balcony. Zhang Wei wondered if she would survive the fall, as he held her by the collar. Feng Xingyue glanced down with a frightened look, her eyes wide like saucers. Ignoring her pleas, Zhang Wei focused on his question. She will definitely survive, host. Better yet, try throwing her from the top floor. The system agreed with Zhang Wei's terribly violent choice. Meanwhile, Feng Xinyue's eyes filled with desperation. Brother, this is scary. Zhang Wei didn't seem to care, he grinned, his teeth bared in a savage expression. It's Daddy from now on. He suddenly released her collar, and Feng Xinyue started yelping as she began to free fall. AAA. Her voice echoed as she fell, and in fear, she closed her eyes tightly shut with tears streaming down her face. She was certain she was going to meet her death. When her body hit the ground, she expected to feel her bones shatter beneath her. Instead, she hit the ground with a dull thud, as if it were made of mush. She sat there weeping, her entire body trembling with relief. Sob *. A few people looked at her with pity, but because of her magic, they ignored her and continued with their work. Meanwhile, Zhang Wei had taken his sweet time, coming down with his new attire, his face pristine and his hair gleaming from his bath. Brother. Feng Xinyue's voice was filled with relief as she sensed Zhang Wei's presence, and she ran to him as fast as she could. Her steps were shaky and unsteady as she approached him, nearly tripping once. It's Daddy, reprimanded Zhang Wei sternly, correcting her instantly. Daddy. Daddy. Feng Xinyue nodded furiously, not daring to defy him. Zhang Wei smiled secretly, feeling a sense of power surging through him. Poor Sky God, already lost his daughter to me, he thought to himself smugly. He took Feng Xinyue's hands, leading her away for a walk. With the TV broken, he didn't have anything else to do, so he decided to roam around the city with her. As their shadows disappeared from sight, another woman holding an umbrella stepped out into view. She smiled in satisfaction, interesting. Who would have thought my great sister would become such a crybaby? However, when she thought of that mortal touching her beloved sister's hand, her eyebrows furrowed, and her face contorted in anger. Her grip tightened around her umbrella, and she watched the two of them disappearing into the distance. Chapter 66 Yi Feng again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What is the highest form of manipulation? It is not the one where you control people like puppets, nor the one where they are merely slaves at your command. The pinnacle of manipulation lies in the ability to reveal your intentions to your victims and yet they choose to remain under your influence. Quote by Zhang Wei. It is the stage where the boundaries between manipulation and free will become indiscernible, where the puppeteer and the puppet merge into one. Such is the insidious power of manipulation in the hands of a true master. Zhang Wei was driving peacefully down the winding road in his luxury car, enjoying the cool breeze on his face and the sound of the tires softly rolling over the asphalt. Suddenly, a nagging thought crept into his mind, and he glanced up at the dashboard display. How many points do I have? He asked the system. You have 150 villain points, host, the system replied cheerfully. A sly smile played across Zhang Wei's lips as he turned to Feng Xinyue, who was sitting in the passenger seat next to him. She was flipping through his phone, completely unaware that Zhang Wei was thinking of ways to milk her and extract some villain points. But he was driving right now, so it was probably not a good idea, until he can control the car with his mind. Maybe I should hire a driver, he thought to himself, but quickly dismissed the idea. He didn't want to risk anything obscene happening in front of a male. As he continued driving, lost in thought, a figure suddenly appeared in the road ahead of him. Zhang Wei raised an brow, he honked the horn frantically, but the person in front of him remained immobile, staring blankly ahead. What the hell, he muttered, frowning in frustration. He had almost no time to react before the woman suddenly started walking towards his car. Zhang Wei's heart thudded in his chest as he slammed on the brakes, but the system's voice cut through the panic. Host, drive over her. His mind raced as he tried to grasp the meaning of the system's words. Did it really want him to commit murder in middle of street? Somehow Zhang Wei thought it was indeed a good chance to test the system words. With a grin, his foot pressed down on the accelerator, the car roaring to life and hurtling towards the woman. The speedometer continued to crawl higher and higher as the sleek car zoomed past the unsuspecting woman. Schwa! To her horror, the woman's eyes bulged as she was catastrophically crushed under the weight of the speeding vehicle. Her body shattered into a million tiny fragments that scattered across the unforgiving asphalt. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared near the scene of the accident. Was that the woman's spirit? Despite his confusion, Zhang Wei felt no remorse, knowing that the system would take care of everything. In fact, he was eager to claim yet another victim, provided system took care of the aftermath. Slowly and cautiously, the shadow materialized into the very woman who had been carrying an umbrella. She struggled to form comprehensible thoughts as she grappled with the shocking reality of Zhang Wei's actions. Fresh to this realm, the woman had only been here for a brief time, but in that time, she had learned that killing among mortals was forbidden. How could he have run her over so carelessly, she muttered, her heart racing with fear. And why was he smiling? The reality of the situation was overwhelming, and for a moment, the woman's breathing even stopped. Zhang Wei's reaction was far different than she had imagined. His eyes glinted with an icy menace that sent chills down her spine. How can a mortal give her that feeling of dread? The sleek Bentley glided effortlessly through the vibrant downtown streets, its polished exterior cutting a sharp contrast to the neon signs and bustling crowds. Shimmering in the sunlight, it came to an abrupt stop in front of the lively arcade, igniting a hushed murmur that rippled through the dense crowd as soon as Yi Feng emerged from the luxurious vehicle and stepped onto the pavement. Curious eyes darted in his direction, whispers erupted around him, and a group of teenage girls stood close by, giggling and whispering animatedly among themselves. One of them, the most daring of the bunch, plucked up the courage to approach him. "Hey, handsome," she purred, batting her eyelashes to catch his attention. "Are you here to play some games with us?" But her attempts were futile as Yi Feng continued forward with a determined look until he reached the entrance of the arcade. As soon as he stepped inside, he was enveloped in a whirlwind of sights and sounds. A vibrant chaos of bleeps, blips, and flashing screens assaulted his senses as he made his way through the maze of excited gamers. Yi Feng's eyes were immediately drawn to a specific spot in the corner where a girl was sitting, her slender fingers gracefully dancing across the keyboard like nimble ballerinas performing a delicate dance. The girl was a stunning sight to behold, with full lips painted in a deep red hue and striking icy blue eyes that sparkled with mischief and lured him into her alluring gaze. Her long, wavy hair cascaded down her back in an unruly tangle of curls, dyed in a bold gradient of black and blue. She wore a tight-fitting black leather jacket that hugged her curves and accentuated her low-cut blue tank top, revealing her ample cleavage and toned stomach. As he took in her alluring appearance, Yi Feng felt a tingling rush of desire run through his veins, imagining how it would feel to run his hands over her alluring figure and exploring every curve and contour. But as much as he craved her, Yi Feng was a man of principles and held on to his morals, steadfastly refusing to indulge in such forbidden desires. He knew this girl had feelings for him and had playfully flirted with him in the past, but he always gently rebuffed her advances and reminded her to find someone her own age. Putting aside his thoughts of lust, Yi Feng strode over to her with a stern expression, making his presence known. "You ran from school again," he remarked drily, his gaze piercing her like a laser. The girl turned around, and he was met with a look of defiance. "Stop lecturing me, Yi Feng," she snapped. "You're supposed to be my friend, not my dad." Despite her harsh words, a deep affection pulsed within Yi Feng's chest. "I worry about you, little one," he said softly. "But I suppose you are not going to tell me why you keep skipping school." She glowered at him, crossing her arms. It doesn't matter. Just help me beat this snoring panda. She has already snatched my top ranking from me. Yi Feng shook his head, and a small smile danced on his lips. Fine. Taking control of the keyboard, he began to race through the game's level with effortless precision. As he progressed, the girl leaned over and cheered him on, her excitement lifting her mood. Soon they found themselves at the final boss, a massive mechanized tank that was blasting its way through a cityscape. Yi Feng and his companion moved with lightning-fast speed, dodging bullets and firing back with lethal force. Sweat trickled down Yi Feng's face as he concentrated on the task at hand. The girl's eyes sparkled with awe and admiration as she watched him emerge victorious, taking down the enemy boss with expert precision. Headshot X4, as the enemy team was defeated, her eyes gleamed with newfound admiration. Wow, she breathed. You are amazing, Yi Feng. He grinned, clipping his fingers together. I'm not an amateur, he said with a wry chuckle. Suddenly, the spotlights turned on, and an excited roar of applause echoed across the arcade. When Yi Feng turned around, he was surprised to see a throng of youngsters surrounding him as though he were a celebrity. The girl tugged at his arm, beaming with pride. Look, I'm at the top of leaderboard again, she cried, bursting with excitement. Yi Feng shook his head wryly. With his extensive experience as a mercenary, games like this were just child's play for him. He felt a sense of irony as he saw the young players, with no real-life experience with guns, struggling to stay alive in the game. A/N. This is my Discord. https://discord.gg/dsc4fftbf. Unlike my last novel, with this one I am taking things slow with lot of world building, and if the chapters aren't being posted just assume, I am taking my time to think. If you want to contribute to novel, just join the Discord and feel free to suggest ideas and share your predictions regarding future plot. Chapter 67 Shenwei City. Activate the artist. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shenwei City. Deep inside the heavily fortified military base that stood at the northernmost end of the country, General Yang leaned back on his plush leather chair. He let out a heavy sigh as he ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. His eyes were fixed on the dimly lit room, which was decorated with a few military accolades mounted on the walls. The room's silence was only broken by the soft whirring sound of the air conditioning unit. Suddenly, his personal phone rang and snapped him back to the present moment. Yang Jun groaned and stood up. He picked up his phone and answered the call in a gruff voice. Okay, I got it. You carry out your instructions as normal. I will deal with this one, he barked before hanging up. He was already guessing what was going to happen next, so he moved his gaze to a picture of a young girl on his desk. Yang Jun's forehead creased as the image of the girl cleared up in his mind. He knew he had to act fast. He stood up to pace around his office, wondering how to find her. Then, he remembered he had a military informant he could call. He hurriedly dialed the number and waited for his contact to answer. The door creaked open, and a man in a military uniform stepped inside. He gave a sharp salute and straightened his posture. Analyst Shi Jian reporting for duty, sir, he exclaimed. Yang Jun gave a nod of acknowledgement and turned his desk towards him. As he leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, with an intense stare directed at Shi Jian. Do you know this girl? He asked, pointing to the picture on his desk. Shi Jian's eyes fixed on the picture as he contemplated the girl's identity. I can locate her, sir. Give me 5 minutes, and I'll back with all necessary information, he promptly responded. Yang Jun gave a nod of approval. After a few minutes, Shi Jian briskly walked into the room with a file in his hands. His breathing was labored, indicating that he had rushed to get there as quickly as he could. Yang Jun didn't waste any time with pleasantries and barked, give me a brief. Okay, sir. Shi Jian responded, his voice slightly trembling with excitement. The woman's name is Bling Yen. She is only 20.3 years old but is already a skilled cultivator. Currently, she is serving as the Deputy Bureau Chief in Qingyun City, located in the Central Region. Shi Jian paused and looked awkwardly at Yang Jun. There was something off about her joining the PSB when she was clearly overqualified for the job. It made him suspicious. Yang Jun's eyes gleamed with curiosity, and he commanded, "Go on." Shi Jian nodded and continued reading from his report. The official record says her father's name is Su Wen, but there is no record of such a person ever existing. I tried to dig through the server, but the information was top secret even with your privileges. Her mother's name is Bling Mei. According to official records, she is the chairman of PowerGen Corporation, and we have no way of accessing any information about her. There is one more person, Leng Xuezhong, currently serving as the Deputy Director General in the Central Region's Public Security Bureau. Other than these individuals, there are many servants residing and working under Leng Mei. She has long stepped away from the executive chair, and our internal information suggests that one of her servants is running PowerGen Corporation's affairs. In my opinion, the woman named Leng Yan is too suspicious, and her background seems to be anything but simple, Shi Jian concluded with admiration. Yang Jun rubbed his chin thoughtfully. To think that even a general would be unable to access information about her family, this woman's family definitely isn't simple. Yang Jun's brows furrowed, his mind reeling as the case before him grew more complicated than he had initially anticipated. Although Leng Xuezhong posed no issue, as a general, Yang Jun held a higher position in the hierarchy. A general in military possessed authority in between somewhere Vice Minister of the Public Security and Director General of PSB. Thus, handling a Deputy Director General of the PSB was no trouble for him. But, the true obstacle loomed in Leng Mei. Her profile, despite his clearance, remained inaccessible. Any direct attack on her would send up a red flag and alert his superior, the Chief General of the Army. This predicament sent shivers through his spine. In the military, there were several ranks. General, Lieutenant General, Major General, Brigadier General, Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel, Major, Captain, Lieutenant, and Second Lieutenant. Ordinarily, the highest rank attained was that of General, and each individual at this rank held control over a specific region in a manner similar to a Director General in the Public Security Bureau. In Hanlan country, the regions were divided into the northern, southern, eastern, western, and central regions. Yang Jun bore the mantle of General of the northern region and held the commanding position there, but there existed an entity above him that he dared not provoke. Even striking him, a cruel and savage act almost inconceivable between two humans, was out of the question. This man was the Chief General of Army and wielded such immense power that an ordinance had been created solely for him, laying out a separate hierarchy within the military. He had become a mythic figure entrenched in the memory of all who knew of him. In fact, one general had attempted to challenge his authority once before, and his efforts had led to his own murder, committed in his own office, no less. Yet, no one dared to seek retribution against the Chief General. And so, no general would cause suspicion to arise for fear of the Chief General's wrath. This tumultuous thought process left Yang Jun feeling unnerved about his involvement, an anxiety which now simmered just below the surface. "Did something happen, General?" asked Shi Jian with a concerned look on his face as he noticed the distress etched on Yang Jun's face. Yang Jun waved his hand, dismissing Shi Jian for now. Once Shi Jian had left, Yang Jun's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust and anger. For too long, he had been using Qingyun City as a base to smuggle innocent children for his gruesome experiments. But now, the people involved in these despicable acts had been caught and were being held under the watchful eye of Leng Yan. If Yang Jun's involvement in these heinous crimes were to be discovered, he knew that it would bring about catastrophic consequences. He would be at the mercy of that terrifying figure above him, and no one would be able to save him. With no other option left, Yang Jun knew that he had to take the risk and eliminate Leng Yan as soon as possible. He would also have to find a way to free Tang Bo and others from jail at the same time. Yang Jun made his decision. He would completely cut off his ties with Qingyun City and search for an alternative source for his materials. That city was no longer safe for his evil schemes. For a moment, Yang Jun ruminated on his previous assumption that Qingyun City was the perfect place to conduct his immoral experiments. But now, it was clear that it was too dangerous, and he needed to find a new location before he was exposed. Without wasting any time, he dialed Ling Shuozhong's number and anxiously waited for him to pick up. As soon as the call connected, he asked with him to release Tang Bo and the others, his voice filled with urgency and concern. Putting on a facade of sincerity, he made an excuse and assured Ling Shuozhong that the real culprit had been caught. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to convince the general that there would be no similar accidents in the future. Ling Shuozhong was no fool. He knew something was up, but the problem was already solved. He didn't want to offend someone as powerful as Yang Jun. He could practically smell the deceit in the air, but he didn't see any upside to challenging him. Despite his reservations, Ling Shuozhong decided to let Tang Bo and the others go. He could see right through Yang Jun's schemes, but as long as there was no cause for alarm in the central region, he didn't care. The involvement of Ling Yan was also a factor that played a role in his decision. He didn't want his beloved niece to get mixed up in the military's problems and suffer the consequences for something that's not her fault. Yang Jun couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement flow through his body as he ended the call with a pleased smile on his face. The general was a sly fox. There was no way he would leave any evidence that could be traced back to him. As he sat back in his chair, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over him as he realized that his name was clear from any involvement. He had only called Ling Shuozhong as a way to ensure that if any accidents arose in the future, his name would be safe from any suspicions. Even if Ling Yan ended up dead, there would be no solid reason to catch him since Tang Bo and others were freed from captivity. And while he knew clearing Ling Yan could raise some suspicions, he had planned it all out so precisely that it would appear as if he was never involved. As he thought about the grandness of his plan, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fear wash over him. If anyone found out what he was up to, his fate could be worse than death. The mere thought of it was enough to make his blood turn cold, causing an eerie chill to run down his spine. But he wasn't going to let that happen. Not when he was so close to achieving everything he had worked so hard for. To ensure that his plan wasn't exposed before its time, he was willing to take the risk. With a sense of determination, he reached for his phone and opened his messaging app. He quickly typed in the details of Ling Yan and sent them to an unknown number. Activate the artist. Make sure it appears as an accident. With that message sent, Yang Jun couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement flow through him. He was getting closer and closer to his ultimate goal, and nothing could stop him now. Ling Yan furrowed her brow in concentration, poring over the documents with intense focus. She was determined to find any shred of evidence that could connect the child traffickers to their original buyer. Ring. Ring. Suddenly, her phone rang, jolting her out of her work. Irritation flared within her as she picked it up, and her face twisted into a troubled expression at what she heard. "But why?" she exclaimed in a frustrated tone. "We have proof against them, why should I free them?" She practically shouted, her voice ringing out through the quiet office. The person on the other end of the line remained calm in their response. "It is for your own good," they said firmly. "I won't take no for an answer." And with a final beep, the call disconnected. Ling Yan slammed the phone down, her frustration boiling over into anger. She stood up from her seat, pacing back and forth as she yelled in exasperation. She couldn't believe that she was being asked to free criminals with concrete evidence against them. As she paced, she couldn't help but remember Zhang Wei's words, and her anger only grew. He had warned her that Tang Bo and the others wouldn't stay locked up forever, but she had refused to believe him. Now, it seemed he had been right all along. Ling Yan sighed deeply, rubbing her temple as she tried to calm down. The situation felt hopelessly frustrating, and she wasn't sure how she was going to resolve it. Chapter 68 Angry Yifeng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As they drove around the bustling downtown area, Zhang Wei looked over at Feng Xinyue and couldn't help but ask, "What are you going to do with all of these things?" He gestured towards the back seat, where a mountain of shopping bags and boxes overflowed onto the floor. Feng Xinyue turned her gaze towards him, her eyes filled with confusion as she shrugged her shoulders. Her eyes darted across the pile of treasures, contemplating how she would use each one. Zhang Wei let out a deep sigh, feeling helpless in the face of her impulsive shopping habits. "You really bought all of this without a specific plan?" he asked in disbelief. Feng Xinyue simply nodded, still unable to comprehend her own actions. Despite the age, gender, or circumstance, one thing remained constant. The innate ability for women to shop until they drop. The system couldn't help but ask, its digital voice sounding a bit incredulous, "Host, why did you even allow her to buy so many things?" Zhang Wei's smile grew sly as he glanced over at the pile of shopping bags and boxes filling up the back seat. "Who said I bought her all of this for free?" he replied cryptically. "She's indebted to me now, and I'll be collecting payment, milk, in installments." The system's mechanical mind was impressed by Zhang Wei's strategic thinking and couldn't help but acknowledge it. "Ah, I see," it responded, nodding slowly in understanding. "Very well played, host." Suddenly, Zhang Wei's eyes darted towards the familiar car parked on the street, causing his eyebrows to raise in surprise. A sense of curiosity and intrigue took hold of him as he slowed his car and pulled up in front of the vehicle to get a better look. With a thud, he pushed the car door open and stepped out, taking in the passing hustle and bustle of the plaza. As he strolled along, Feng Xinyue walking alongside him, he scanned the area for the owner of the car. Finally, his eyes fell upon a man sitting on a bench, engrossed in a video game, with headphones on, his short, trimmed hair giving him an air of confidence. It was Yifeng. Yifeng, who else is there, thought Zhang Wei. It wasn't just Yifeng who caught Zhang Wei's attention. A teenage girl with half-blue dyed hair upstaged Yifeng, instantly captivating Zhang Wei's attention. She was stunning. Although a little underdeveloped, it was clear she would only need a few more years to become completely alluring, rivaling even the top beauties of the area. As he gaped at her, he tried to piece together who she could be. Could it be Lin Roshi? "No way, that teenage girl is Lin Roshi," he murmured. Upon closer inspection, he was convinced himself that it wasn't Lin Roshi, but someone else. She was a stranger, another rich girl basking in the luxury of the plaza. +++===== status. Name: Song Shoshan. Age: 18. Body rank: mortal. Cultivation level: none. Bloodline: none. Spirit beast: none. Cultivation talent: mundane. Spiritual root rank: superior. Spiritual root ==========. Such a shame, Zhang Wei shook his head in disappointment. No talent in cultivation. What a waste. The girl may have had a good spiritual root, but it was of no use without talent in cultivation. Zhang Wei had witnessed this situation many times before. Plenty of people had average or superior spiritual roots but with no discernible talent. Zhang Wei turned to address the system, "Can you provide me with more information about that girl?" The system responded, "That will cost you 10 villain points, host." Zhang Wei nodded, and a wealth of information about Song Shoshan rushed into his head. "Ah, interesting," he murmured with amusement. Her mother hails from the esteemed Zhao family in the capital, but both of her parents are living separately due to a dispute. Her father, Song Pajuan, is the eldest son of the Song family patriarch and also holds the position of mayor of this city. As if he hadn't been at odds with the Song family enough, Zhang Wei had now found a new opportunity to destroy them. Smiling with eager satisfaction, he approached them. "Yifeng. Give me your card, my balance is over." Song Shoshan demanded, extending her hand towards him with a sense of entitlement, as if she were the queen and he her servant. Yi Feng turned to her, his irritation palpable. It's already noon, you should go home now, he suggested tersely. Song Shoshan's face twisted in anger. Don't tell me what to do, she snapped. Just as Yi Feng opened his mouth to respond, a hand appeared out of nowhere and slipped a card into Song Shoshan's hand. Use this, a commanding voice echoed, causing Song Shoshan to jump in shock. Ha! I don't take favors from strangers, she protested, her voice tinged with suspicion. Turning her head slowly to see the stranger's face, her expression quickly transformed from one of mistrust to one of disbelief. She gripped the card and spoke awkwardly, I was just joking. She couldn't believe it. How could this god-like man be a scammer while Yi Feng, with his slothful appearance, be genuine? Zhang Wei's looks were miles apart from Yi Feng's, and even the thought of them in the same category was laughable. Unbeknownst to Zhang Wei, the body-cleaning pill, combined with his unique cultivation technique, was amplifying his natural charm to new heights. From the moment he began cultivating, a different aura surrounded him, much denser than that of any other cultivator. His overwhelming presence and striking looks left an indelible impression on those around him, including Song Shoshan. I am no stranger, miss, I know your mother, added Zhang Wei. His words sent a shiver down Song Shoshan's spine. Her face went pale as she looked behind him, hoping to see someone else in the room. But other than Feng Xinyue, there was no one. You know my mother, she asked, her voice trembling. Zhang Wei's nod confirmed her fears. Zhao Hongyan, right. We are business partners, he said casually. His eyes trailed down to her schoolbag and he gave a knowing smile. I can guess you're skipping classes, but don't worry, I won't tell your mother. Song Shoshan's emotions were in turmoil. She couldn't believe that this man, who knew her mother, had caught her skipping school. You won't tell my mother, right? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zhang Wei's assurance immediately put her at ease. Games are equally important for health, he said with a grin. A smile lit up Song Shoshan's face. Indeed, indeed. By the way, what is your name, uncle? Sir, she asked, almost slipping up on the word uncle. Zhang Wei managed to keep a calm expression, even as he shook her hand. It's Zhang Wei, he replied smoothly. I am Shoshan. Nice to meet you, she said, her voice laced with excitement. Can I call you Zhang Wei? No, how about we become friends? Isn't it better, she suggested, eager to forge a connection with the man who knew her mother. Zhang Wei pretended to consider her proposal for a moment before nodding. As she chattered on about games and school, he couldn't help but marvel at his own acting skills. Just a few moments ago, he had no idea who Zhao Hongyan was, but now he had successfully convinced her daughter that they were business partners. Meanwhile, Yi Feng narrowed his eyes suspiciously and shot a piercing glare at Zhang Wei. The man's presence gave him an uneasy feeling. Who is this white face, anyways? He muttered under his breath. He's tricking you, Yi Feng spoke up, his eyes squinting with disgust. Yi Feng's intuition warned him that Zhang Wei was up to something sinister. Song Shoshan turned around to face Yi Feng and stuck out her tongue playfully. Shut up, Yi Feng. Or are you jealous because I have a new friend? She said, flashing an amused smile. Yi Feng's forehead creased with a frown. Why would I be jealous of a pretty white face, he retorted, a hint of irritation in his voice. Zhang Wei let out a chuckle and replied in a sarcastic tone, right, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, isn't that right, Yi Feng? The latter snorted with anger and responded, don't take my name from your disgusting mouth. He sensed that Zhang Wei had a particular interest in targeting him, and the thought made his skin crawl with unease. Song Shoshan raised her eyebrows in confusion, wondering, what's going on between these two? She couldn't comprehend why they were suddenly at each other's throats. Do they have an history, she thought. Despite the tense atmosphere in the room, Yi Feng pretended to ignore Zhang Wei's presence. Meanwhile, Song Shoshan turned to Zhang Wei, hoping to alleviate the tension with a simple question. Do you know how to play Counter-Strike? I can teach you. I don't play games, teach her instead. Zhang Wei shook his head and pointed to Feng Xinyue, causing Song Shoshan to raise an eyebrow in surprise. You don't play any games in the 21st century. That's weird, she muttered under her breath. Undeterred, Song Shoshan turned to Feng Xinyue. Determined to break the ice, she decided to take matters into her own hands and taught the basics to the little girl. The room was quiet, with only the sounds of clicking mice and tapping keyboards filling the air. Feng Xinyue's little Nizi brain was miles ahead of humans. She figured out everything by herself, quickly clearing lobbies and impressing everyone in the room. Zhang Wei, are you sure she's not superhuman? Song Shoshan asked with an awkward laugh. Meanwhile, Feng Xinyue was completely absorbed in the game. Her eyes shone with a sharp glint as she killed people one by one. The intensity of the game was palpable, and everyone watched in awe as the little girl became a force to be reckoned with. Zhang Wei couldn't help but smile bitterly to himself. If he knew the result would be like this, he never would have suggested it. However, the little girl was now raising suspicion among everyone. If this continued, she might reach the top of the leaderboard and make history as the fastest learner in the world. Yi Feng squinted his eyes in suspicion. He could clearly tell she was an amateur when she started and wasn't faking it. Her learning ability started to make him curious yet suspicious. Zhang Wei couldn't take it anymore and shifted in his seat, whispering in Feng Xinyue's ear. She nodded in agreement, and the next moment, her avatar was killed. You have been eliminated by XXCH63. Yi Feng clicked his tongue in annoyance. TSK, she was just lucky, he muttered to himself. As the game continued, Yi Feng focused on his own gameplay, trying to ignore his growing irritation towards Zhang Wei. Meanwhile, Song Shoshan nodded in agreement with Yi Feng's assessment that Feng Xinyue had simply gotten lucky. There was no way she could master the game so quickly. For the next hour, Feng Xinyue played like an average player, not showcasing her exceptional brain power. As Yi Feng played, his gaze constantly moved towards Zhang Wei. Something about the man's aura rubbed him the wrong way, and his instincts kept warning him to be careful around him. Chapter 69 Yi Feng. A Dog on a Leash. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As time slowly passed, Zhang Wei grew increasingly bored just watching the other three play. He sighed and fidgeted in his seat, wishing he could join in on the action, but he wasn't really into video games. Frustrated, he took out his phone and started randomly disturbing Lang Yan and Rose in succession, a mischievous smirk spreading across his face. Having multiple women is really advantageous, he thought to himself as he continued to annoy them. Meanwhile, Song Shoshan was fully immersed in the game, her eyes fixated on the screen as she eliminated players one by one. She suddenly thought of something and turned to Yi Feng, a sly smile forming on her lips. Hey Yi Feng, have you ever killed a person? She asked, her voice full of curiosity. With one swift click of her mouse, she eliminated yet another player, causing blood to spurt from his avatar's head and die. Yi Feng continued to play the game as if he had never heard her question, but Zhang Wei noticed a slight flicker in his eyes that hinted at something deeper. Song Shoshan snorted when Yi Feng didn't reply and turned to Zhang Wei, a mischievous glint in her eye. Hey, do you know how it feels to kill someone? She asked curiously, the excitement of the game still coursing through her veins. Zhang Wei's attention was drawn away from his phone as he heard the words, killing someone, spoken by the person beside him. He put his phone down and looked at her with a thoughtful expression on his face. You don't actually feel anything until you want to feel it, he said, his voice calm and measured. Those who claim to feel guilty do so because they assume they've done something wrong. But to those who think they've done nothing wrong, it all seems normal. Suddenly, his tone shifted, becoming darker and more intense. His eyes fixed on a distant point, as if he was seeing something that only he could see. But once you've taken a life, there's no going back, he said. You realize that the rules of society, the police, and all these constructs are just preventive measures. Not absolute ones, they are not gods, and their rules are not unbreakable. You see just how fragile human life is and can never again trust anyone else to protect it. Zhang Wei's voice grew even more ominous as he continued, you have to take matters into your own hands because the law only comes into play after the crime has already ended. Once you've accepted this, you can kill again and again. The second time, the third time, and so on. It becomes easier each time. You realize that you alone control your own fate, and the only law that matters is the one you make for yourself. Song Shoshan's curiosity was piqued, and she asked Zhang Wei, isn't killing a crime? Zhang Wei nodded his head in agreement. Why do you think experimenting on cockroaches is acceptable, but killing butterflies isn't? Zhang Wei replied, his voice calm and measured. Their conversation then turned to a debate on the concept of killing and its relationship to the utility an organism provides to society. Zhang Wei explained that researchers and scientists who contribute positively to society are viewed as more valuable than others. Conversely, those who cause harm or provide negative utility, such as criminals, should be neutralized with urgency. The question of whether human life matters, therefore, requires an examination of how value is assigned. Feeling intrigued by the discussion, Song Shoshan asked, if killing isn't bad, then why do people feel isolated or go insane after they do it? She had seen it in movies and TV shows, where characters who had taken a life became isolated, disconnected, or even went insane. Zhang Wei glanced at Yi Feng, who appeared to be getting increasingly uncomfortable with their conversation. But Zhang Wei's smile remained as he carefully framed his next words. They don't feel isolated, he spoke, his voice calm and measured. What? Song Shoshan looked up from the screen, surprised by Zhang Wei's statement. They feel alienated, not isolated, Zhang Wei explained. Human beings are social creatures. We want to share what we've done, share our feelings of how it felt to kill with others. But when you've taken a life, you become an outcast. You're no longer part of the society you once belonged to. You're no longer like everyone else. This leads to a profound sense of loneliness and disconnection. Zhang Wei's expression grew somber as he continued, when a soldier is in the military, even after killing, he quickly adapts because everyone around him is a killer. They can share their experiences, and they understand each other. But once he comes back to the real world, he feels suffocated because he can't talk about his feelings with anyone. He's been trained to think that killing is bad, but he's done it anyway. He's been programmed to think one way, but his experiences tell him another. Song Shoshan listened intently, fascinated by the depth of Zhang Wei's insights. So why do soldiers feel the need to share their experiences with others, he asked. Zhang Wei's eyes shone with understanding as he replied, they want acceptance. They want someone to tell them that what they did was okay. If a person has already accepted that they have done nothing wrong, then they won't need to share their experiences with others to self-justify their acts. But for most people, the weight of what they've done is just too heavy to bear alone. Most people are weak. Zhang Wei leaned forward, and spoke deeply. It's not just limited to killing. There are people in general who don't fit the mold, who question the status quo. People who don't want to follow the typical path of school, college, job, marriage, and death. They want to explore new ways of living, to break free from the constraints of society. Then there are those who question the very nature of reality itself. People who challenge the traditional notions of good and evil, right and wrong. Those who question the existence of God, the purpose of life, and the very fabric of the universe. All of these people are different from the crowd, and it's the fear of being different that leads to their alienation from society. Song Shoshan listened, fascinated by Zhang Wei's words. Zhang Wei continued, these people are often seen as a threat by society. They represent a challenge to the established order, and that makes people uncomfortable. But it's important to remember that these people are not necessarily a danger to society. They are simply exploring different ways of living, different ways of understanding the world around them. It's only when they are pushed to the fringes of society that they become a problem. Zhang Wei leaned forward, his eyes intense as he spoke. It's not just limited to killing. There are people out there who don't fit the general order or norm. All of these people are different from the crowd. These all are the ones who don't mindlessly follow what they have been told. In general, these people are called deviants, all of them deviates from normal order of thinking. But if these deviants don't come to terms with their own thoughts and actions, they may end up like your friend Yifeng. Internally suffocated and torn apart, pretending to be strong and collected, Zhang Wei continued. Bam! Yifeng suddenly stood up, his chair clattering to the ground. He grabbed Zhang Wei by the collar and shouted, "Shut up your mouth already. What are you teaching her?" Yifeng's sudden outburst startled Song Shoshan and Feng Xinyue, who both jumped in their seats. Zhang Wei, however, remained calm and collected, meeting Yifeng's angry gaze with a sly smirk. As Yifeng grabbed him by the collar, Zhang Wei leaned in close and whispered tauntingly, "A mercenary coming to the civilian world, living like a beggar. Let me guess, you have money, but you think it's bad because it came from evil sources. Did I hit a sore spot? Are you tired of running, constantly escaping the battlefield? Or did you suddenly realize that the work you were doing was evil?" Yifeng's hands shook with fury as he asked, "Who are you?" His face was contorted with rage, but Zhang Wei seemed to be enjoying himself. Suddenly, Yifeng's phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. He snatched it up and walked away from Zhang Wei, but Zhang Wei's sharp ears still picked up the conversation. "TSK, a dog." Zhang Wei laughed to himself as he listened in on Yifeng's conversation with Lin Ruoshi. Yifeng's subservience was palpable, and Zhang Wei couldn't help but think of him as a dog on a leash, obediently following his master's orders. Zhang Wei had lost all respect for someone who acted in such a manner as he had just witnessed in the phone call. Yifeng, seemingly in a rush, hastily grabbed his car keys and shot Zhang Wei a final, heated glare before storming out of the place. It was clear that he was already behind in picking up Lin Ruoshi, and delaying any further would result in a scolding from her. Song Shoshan, filled with guilt and embarrassment on behalf of Zhang Wei, turned to him and spoke in a meek tone. "I'm sorry about earlier," she apologized sincerely. Zhang Wei adjusted his collar and let out a chuckle. "Forget it," he replied smoothly, knowing that his mission had already been accomplished. In the course of a single day, Yifeng's perception on Song Shoshan's mind had plummeted. As if that wasn't enough, Zhang Wei peeked at his watch and made an insinuation. "It's getting late, and it's not exactly safe for you to travel home alone." He looked at Song Shoshan, who suddenly panicked and furiously looked at the time. "Zhang Wei," she pled in desperation, "could you come with me, please? You could just say that I was with you, or my mom will kill me if I go home alone." Her voice trembled with genuine fear. If Xiao Hongyan realizes her daughter was not only skipping school but also staying this late outside, she might as well be stripped off of all privileges. Zhang Wei, with a sly smile, pretended to think before agreeing to go with her. Song Shoshan beamed brightly, completely oblivious to what Zhang Wei had in store. He wondered how he was supposed to convince her mother of the truth when he didn't even know who Xiao Hongyan was. What could he possibly be thinking about plotting next? However, just as Zhang Wei reached for the car door handle, an inexplicable anomaly occurred. Suddenly, the colorful world that surrounded him faded into a stark black and white. Startled and confused, Zhang Wei looked around him, trying to make sense of what was happening. "What is happening now?" he exclaimed, his heart racing with unease. As he attempted to establish contact with the system, he realized that the connection had been severed. Panic set in as he felt a sudden disconnect from the world around him. To his horror, he noticed that everything had come to a complete halt. The trees, the people, even the birds in the sky. All were frozen in time, as if suspended in mid-air. The eerie silence was overwhelming, and Zhang Wei couldn't shake off the feeling that he was all alone in a world that had ceased to exist. Chapter 70 Meeting with Zhao Hongyan. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The world around them seemingly transformed as the black and white hues that had once dominated dissolved into an array of vibrant colors. Time resumed its normal function, yet Zhang Wei remained in a state of confusion, still reeling from his earlier encounter with an unknown entity. He had been trapped in that moment for what felt like an eternity, but still, time had stood still. The entity had warned him not to reveal its existence to the system, so for now, Zhang Wei would remain silent, observing and analyzing his surroundings until he could figure out what was happening. The secret conversation between the unknown entity and Zhang Wei would be revealed in future. With a stoic expression on his face, Zhang Wei took hold of the steering wheel and closed the car door as Song Shoshan sat quietly next to him, occasionally giving him directions to her home. He didn't need her guidance though, he already knew the way to Mansion Row like the back of his hand. Suddenly, he reached for his cigarettes and lit one inside the car, inhaling deeply as he rolled down the windows. "Hey, don't smoke while driving," protested Song Shoshan, but Zhang Wei paid her no mind, offering a curt reply. "The doors are unlocked. Jump down whenever you want." His sudden change in mien left Song Shoshan completely taken aback and unsure of how to react. Zhang Wei wasn't in the mood to argue with a high schooler. His mind was preoccupied with something else, and he needed some clarifications from the system. "Hey system, is there a difference between manipulating someone and blackmailing them?" he inquired. For a moment, the system remained silent, causing Zhang Wei to feel impatient. But then it responded, "What kind of difference are you talking about?" Zhang Wei paused to gather his thoughts. "Well, in manipulation, we give someone what they want. But in blackmailing, we take something away from them and hold it ransom. So, is there a difference between the two?" The system took a moment to process his query before answering bluntly, "Of course there's a difference, host. In the first scenario, the person you're dealing with would likely have a positive opinion of you. But in blackmailing, you're doing something that is frowned upon, and more often than not, they would hate you for it. Just like Rome Meili or Ling Yen." Zhang Wei listened attentively, nodding as he realized the truth in the system's words. Then, the system continued, "Yu Lei is one of those cases of manipulation, where you give her what she wants emotionally, and she holds a favorable opinion of you despite that. But maybe you haven't analyzed your behavior yet. Although you eye every beautiful woman on the road, your way of approaching them is different. For some, you take the brute force approach with blackmail and coercion, while for others, you prefer to manipulate them. You don't seem to care about the opinion or hate of one category of women while being sensitive to the feelings of others." Zhang Wei raised his thick eyebrows in surprise, his eyes widening in realization. He nodded slowly, his mind processing the truth that had just come to light. "Why do you ask this out of the blue, host?" asked the system, its mechanical voice sounding slightly off, as if even it sensed that things were not as they seemed. Zhang Wei didn't bother to reply, his gaze distant as he focused on the road ahead. He knew he was the master here, not the system. But the boundaries between manipulation and coercion became clear to him after talking to that unknown entity and the system. He couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that refused to go away. He continued to drive, the wheels of his car screeching as he took a sharp turn. The road ahead of him was deserted, the silence broken only by the sound of his car's engine. Finally, he arrived at a slightly secluded area within the Mansion Row. His eyes widened in surprise as he took in the sight before him. The mansion was neither too big nor too small, with a sleek, contemporary design that bespoke wealth and style. But what surprised him was the fact that there were no more mansions nearby, and it was located in a secluded place. It was as if it didn't belong in this neighborhood, as if it had been transported by some magic to this spot. For someone to own something like this, it was impossible that they would recommend such a design personally at the time of construction. Even the construction of big cities wasn't done by families like Song or Lin, rather by the influential big dogs in the capital. Zhang Wei wasn't surprised, considering Zhao Hongyan's last name was Zhao. His mind raced as he tried to connect the dots, wondering why someone from the capital would marry into the Song family. It didn't make sense, and his gut told him that there was more to this story than what met the eye. Why would someone from capital marry in Song family? With a smooth stop, the car came to a halt, and Song Shoshan unlocked the door before stepping outside. However, just as she got out, her ears tuned into the sound of a woman's voice, sending shivers down her spine. Shan Shan. A slightly tall yet striking woman stood before the pavement, her frown evident on her face. The woman's figure was nothing less than captivating. Standing tall with poise and elegance, her rosy cheeks shone against her glowing, milky skin, and her gaze penetrated endlessly into the horizon, shimmering like the water beneath the sun. An aura of charisma and charm oozed from her well-endowed body, accentuated by her ample breasts and plump, rounded derriere that filled out her fitted black cotton dress with ease. With each step, her toned, slender thighs ensconced in beige stockings were revealed. The feet that shone in elegant crystal-colored high heels drew attention to her every movement. She exuded nobility and sophistication, which was impossible to ignore. Song Shoshan felt her mother's sharp eyes piercing through her, instantly causing her expression to change to a look of terror. "Mom, I..." But before she could say anything, her mother's mature figure slightly bent and hugged her, startling Song Shoshan, who was not used to this show of affection. "Ha!" Song Shoshan was surprised by the sudden change. She and Zhao Hongyan used to have frequent fights, so it came as an unexpected surprise. "Thank God, Shanshan, you're home safe and sound. I was so worried that something had happened to you." Zhao Hongyan's voice was filled with genuine concern, causing tears to well up in Song Shoshan's eyes. Song Shoshan felt embarrassed and guilty for having skipped school and played games all day, but she dared not confess. She extended her hand, whispering, "I'm all right, Mom. Zhang Wei was with me." Her words were barely audible, and she felt even more guilty when she saw her mother's expression of concern turn to relief. Zhao Hongyan broke the embrace and smoothed down her hair, masking any hint of emotion with an air of nobility. But then she suddenly remembered there was someone else in the car. "Who is this Zhang Wei, Shanshan?" she asked, her eyes peering through the car window. Song Shoshan looked utterly bewildered, and the confusion was evident on her face. She couldn't wrap her head around why her own mother didn't know Zhang Wei. The puzzle pieces simply refused to fit together, leaving her feeling increasingly troubled and anxious. She spent a few moments staring blankly into space, trying to come up with a way to explain the situation to her mother. Meanwhile, inside the car, Zhang Wei was watching the unfolding drama with keen interest. He couldn't help but notice how much Zhao Hongyan valued her daughter, which only made his next move that much easier. As he stepped out of the vehicle, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Good evening, Ms. Hongyan. My name is Zhang Wei, and I happen to be one of Shanshan's closest friends." Zhao Hongyan regarded Zhang Wei with a cautious eye, not entirely certain what to make of him. She appraised him from head to toe, desperately trying to glean some insight into who he was and what he wanted from them. "Well, hello there, Zhang Wei. It's certainly a pleasure to finally meet one of Shanshan's friends," she said, her tone carefully neutral. Zhang Wei purposely used the term Ms. for Zhao Hongyan, knowing that she lived separately from her husband and wanting to avoid any possible confusion or awkwardness. Seeing that she hadn't interrupted him, it further confirmed that his choice was well on point. Zhao Hongyan eyed Zhang Wei warily, unsure of his intentions. She hesitated before deciding to let him in, conscious of her daughter's safety. "All right, come inside and let's talk," she waved towards the entrance. "Shanshan, take Zhang Wei to the living room while I make some tea." Song Shoshan reluctantly guided Zhang Wei to the living room, visibly uneasy about the situation. Sensing her discomfort, he attempted to put her at ease. Don't worry, Shanshan. Your mother seems reasonable. I'm sure we can resolve things. But Song Shoshan's countenance darkened and she spat, you tricked me. Undaunted, Zhang Wei chuckled and replied, well, didn't you also trick me to come here? We're even now, girl. Song Shoshan fell silent, lips pursed in a pout. She braced herself for the scolding that she knew was coming from her mother later.